He if we can send Bernice the connection, and I'll get started, and Bernice can close the session.
Okay.
Sure thing. I'll have Salam to go live and hand it on over to you, Sameh. Oh, Peter, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Please, Peter, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening to those in the other parts of the world. And welcome to our session today, A Greener Tomorrow, as part of our GPO forum. And today we're talking about cities and climate change. And in Washington, D.C., where it's been pretty cold, I just read on the weather report that today's actually the warmest day of the week. So maybe it's a coincidence there. So we'd like to invite you to an exciting discussion today with a really excellent set of speakers. And as we know, cities have been at the forefront of sort of the climate discussion in terms of the narrative that a lot of greenhouse gas emissions happen within cities. However, at least in our discussions with our counterparts, mayors or governors, the question is often posed back at us, so what do you expect cities to do? They do not control what happens necessarily in their space, and they're not responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions. So that's one question they usually have. And with the COVID crisis, we've seen now a discussion about how cities can actually recover, not only recover from the crisis, but build back in a better way, in a greener way, not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but actually to make it more livable for the citizens, which should be for most mayors actually the foremost priority. So we'll hear from mayors today about their actions in this regard, and we'll also have key academic speakers. So with that, let me, since we have a packed agenda, I will not say too much. Let me hand it over to Sameh Waba, who's our Global Director for Urban Resilience and Land, to kick us off on the session. And then I will introduce each speaker as we go along. So Sameh, over to you, please.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Pleasure for me to be here. My colleague, Bernice von Bronckhorst, who's the Global Director for Climate Change, was meant to kick us off and give us a little bit of a framing of where does the agenda of cities fit within the broader climate change agenda at the bank. So I'll try, in probably my substandard way to fill in for her. But as you might know, the bank in December announced a new scaling up of our climate co-benefits to reach 35% of our IDA and IBRD financing over the coming 5 years. This is a 20% increase over our previous climate co-benefits. And the other target that the bank has put forward is that 50% of this financing will go towards adaptation, which is an important priority for many of our clients who find themselves, having to bear the brunt of this crisis. And especially within many of the cities that we work with. So in this regard, I mean, the bank is putting forward, 3 critical transformations that would change the direction of our, climate change action, so that we can really scale up the momentum that we have towards the alignment with the Paris Agreement. And these 3 transformations are basically the energy transformation, the food systems transformation, and the city and mobility, or the city and transport transformation. So it is in this regard that we are having really a renewed momentum within the World Bank Group on scaling up climate action within cities in terms of climate change mitigation, as Peter has mentioned. I mean, sometimes when we talk to our mayors, some of those policy levers that are most critical for climate action on the mitigation front might not be within their wherewithals. Things like, energy, especially, power generation. Many of the cities that we work with are, connected to national or to regional grids, and therefore, without really having much levers in this regard. Of course, renewables has allowed a very different trajectory. Although we do start seeing, situations where there are national, local dynamics, as some that are playing themselves today, for instance, in the city of Cape Town, over control over the development of the energy matrix. Of course, transport, again, sometimes at metropolitan level, but there are important levers, be they land use, be they the building sector, building regulations, etc., that can create momentum for cities. And of course, On the adaptation front, I mean, this is something that at the World Bank, we've been working extensively with our clients on strengthening their adaptation to climate change, their resilience to natural hazards whose intensity and severity is increasing. So all to say, this is really a critical agenda for the World Bank Group. It has been critical, it's been given renewed momentum, and we have very important and ambitious targets to go ahead. So, I mean, and as part of the signal to the importance of this agenda, we have with us today, the Vice President of the Europe and the Central Asia region, who's super interested in how do we transform this agenda to support her clients. And we have a great lineup with mayors, policymakers, academics who will give us the forefront of the thinking. So without further ado, give it back to Peter, and I hope I managed to fill in acceptably well for Bernice, and I think she'll be with us to help bring that session to a closure. So back to you, Peter, please.
Thank you, Sami, for those excellent framing remarks. So with this, let me move to our next speaker, Professor Diana Urs-Vorsatz. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And so Professor Diana is the Vice Chair of the Working Group number 3 for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and is also Professor of the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at the Central European University. And we all hear a lot about the IPCC report, and I think the last one was heavily quoted and referenced in the discussions on climate change. And I think for those of us working on cities, there was always a frustration on not much articulation, or we thought not well articulated enough on the role of cities, especially in the rapidly urbanizing world and the implications that could have, but also as we will hear later, in even the well-developed cities in terms of how they deal with climate. So let me hand it over to Professor Diana, who will talk about the key global trends that we observe. And as her role as chair of this, writing this chapter on climate and cities, we look forward to hearing what, sort of getting a sneak preview of what's potentially coming out in the report. So with that, over to you, Diana.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank very much for the invitation for this prestigious session. I'm afraid I cannot give any sneak preview of what's coming up, but I want to share with you a couple of thoughts that's possible in 8 minutes about, for example, from the Cities IPCC conference, or the Cities and Climate Change Science Conference that the IPCC co-organized, and where I was the co-chair of the Scientific Steering Committee, as well as from some of the latest scientific literature. So first of all, as was already mentioned, cities are definitely key to climate change mitigation. Not only are urban areas responsible for a large share of emissions, exactly how much depends very much on how you measure it, or in order of magnitude, we are talking about 70%. But also because a very significant share of global GDP is produced in cities. This gives room for a much faster change, and also, as you know best, that investments are always opportunities for mitigation, to integrate mitigation priorities into investments. And now, after the COVID crisis, we have another unique window of opportunity, as it was very well phrased, since about the IPCC quoted perhaps 2-3-5% annually of global GDP would be sufficient, or even 2% already for 2 degrees, a bit higher for meeting 1.5 degrees to meet the ambitious goals in the Paris Agreement. Nevertheless, now we are devoting, or many countries are devoting, up to 28% of their GDP into economic stimulus, post-COVID-19 economic stimulus. So just even part of that money directed well towards climate change can definitely is a huge opportunity to solve many of the issues for which otherwise it's harder to raise funding. So another point is that just building the needed urban infrastructure by 2050 will consume up to half of our remaining carbon budget to 1.5 degrees. You all know what is, you all work with budgets. This is a bit complicated figure. This was based on our Cities IPCC work and was published in Nature. And what it shows is this is the remaining embodied carbon that will be embodied in the urban infrastructure that is to be built to close the urban infrastructure gap until the middle of the century. And this amount will basically eat up half of the carbon budget, as I mentioned, that we have left. This means without yet switching a light switch on. So that's an enormous responsibility or liability. Nevertheless, it's also a tremendous opportunity. And this is what we are, and researchers are working on, how to turn this reliability, this responsibility into an opportunity. But let's go back to COVID-19. How is the stimulus and how is the whole pandemic providing opportunities for mitigation in the urban sphere? And I want to highlight just three particular opportunities or rounds of opportunities which are perhaps relevant for the World Bank to some extent. The mobility infrastructure, digitalization, and climate neutral construction and retrofit. With regard to mobility, we have seen that in many cities, the pandemic has brought, and the lockdown has brought, a significant shift away, unfortunately, partially from public transport, but in general, non-motorized mobility has become at the forefront. What we also see that in most cities, this actually, even post-lockdown, a lot of this stayed, since as much of our scientific publications, for example, my paper on lock-in, has shown that there is also a behavioral lock-in. So once people are used they take out their bikes and they are used to certain behavior patterns, they may stick with it. However, infrastructure is crucial to enable such transitions and behavioral transitions for locking in new climate responses, because presently most of our cities are not safe and not accessible for two-wheelers and bicycles or pedestrians for mobility. For example, my children are begging me always to be able to go to school by bike, and I cannot allow them. Simply, it's not safe. There is not, and also if my son decides to go himself, but there are many places where he cannot get from one place to the other. So the question is really who owns the public space in our cities, whether it's really, because it seems that cars, light duty vehicles have a right to the public infrastructure and roads and safe and comprehensive infrastructure, whereas other modes don't. And this is really a crucial question to ask, whether there is a restructuring needed. And COVID-19 certainly provides a very important opportunity, not only because the temporary changing of the urban of streets, but also because the pandemic has brought a definite new change in urban conception of urban space, for example, related to office space and retail space. And if less of this will be needed, perhaps some of that could be reallocated to non-motorized mobility. The second area also in the end affecting mobility is digitalization. We saw that the pandemic accelerated digitalization, and these digital alternatives that provided alternatives for urban trips, that we don't necessarily want to be stuck in traffic, we just want to get our stuff done. And these alternatives, if these are locked in through either good digital infrastructure or digital urban infrastructure and equitable access to digital infrastructure and digital services, then this is definitely much easier to lock these changes in, which are still, in most of the countries, are still very much relied on and will be relied on for a while. So third is towards a climate neutral urban infrastructure. And I mentioned already how tremendously important it is to the investments in urban in infrastructure. Much of the stimulus money goes to build stuff now, but it's extremely important because infrastructure locks in emissions for many decades to come, and it is extremely important that then all of this infrastructure that is built is really not locking in high emissions. So every infrastructure investment that even from the World Bank somehow facilitates also needs to go under very high scrutiny, that it is not locking in high carbon emissions for a long time. And there are novel opportunities in two areas. First of all, low carbon construction. And this is, so for example, replacing concrete by wood, which is not only that eliminates concrete or cement related emissions, but also actually stores the carbon in the wood. Now, of course, wood is not available everywhere, but now we can build even high-rise buildings from wood, so it's very important. Wood is not available everywhere, but there are many other bio-based materials. For example, this is a kindergarten made from straw, and this is also, it's mostly accessible everywhere, and it's also cheap, but it's also high-tech. We are talking about really high-tech, cutting-edge construction, but also financially accessible. So in this paper, we summarized a lot of this knowledge in Annual Review of Environment and Resources, which was published last year. I encourage you to visit this. And final point is that it's also very important to understand that today, net zero energy buildings. So one was the embodied energy, but it's also an embodied carbon, but also operational energy is extremely important. Net zero energy or even energy plus buildings, the paper concluded that it is feasible basically everywhere in the world by today. This is also in retrofits, so also from existing buildings. And retrofits have been highlighted by most studies as the most labor intensive or stimulus investment option, so creating the most jobs. For example, Sir Nicholas Stearns, who was the chief economist of World Bank, he made several studies, but the International Energy Agency and many other, basically any study that investigated different opportunities, retrofits are one of the best choices, building retrofits for stimulus investments. They create a lot of jobs, but it's crucial that we are talking about net zero retrofits, and they are possible everywhere, even in historic buildings. We have just released 2 days ago a study where, and this is showing in this particular study, how you can actually drop energy use by at least 10-fold or even 20-fold in commercial buildings by energy plus retrofits. And what we even show that in this particular case, this will be our new home of my university, even the investment costs are actually lower than a conventional retrofit, but we never think about this. So yes, let's not get back to normal because normal wasn't working, and let's go for a climate neutral building stock and urban, and let's go towards climate neutral cities as much as possible. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Diana. That was very sobering in some ways, and I appreciate the statistic about the how the new urban expansion and growth could offset a lot of the gains made elsewhere in the economy. And I think that's an important one as we have discussions with our counterpart cities and also within the World Bank with our own country units. So next, let's move to Nick Godfrey, who's the director for the Coalition on Urban Transitions. And Nick works with has worked a lot on the issues of building back better and building back greener, and how to support cities and local governments as they transition to this greener, more low carbon pathway that Diana has mentioned. So Nick, over to you, please.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for the kind invitation, Sami, Peter. Just want to start by saying very much welcome World Bank leadership on this agenda and the new momentum that Sami, you mentioned. And Diana, very much welcome the key message that you presented in terms of the significant opportunities to transform cities, particularly in terms of low carbon construction and non-motorized transport. just going to share my screen, and maybe Peter, you can just let me know if you can see it okay.
We can see it fine, Nick, thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm Nick Godfrey, I'm the Director of the Coalition for Urban Transitions. I'm going to say something briefly about the important role that we see in terms of the role cities can play in building back better, and how we could link this to the long-term climate story. So just by way of introduction, what is the Coalition for Urban Transitions? We're a partnership of over 36 institutions, public, private, third sector, that have all come together as a community spanning all 5 continents to help support national level decision makers to meet their core economic, social and climate goals through transforming cities. And our vision is zero carbon, resilient and inclusive cities by mid-century, empowered and enabled by national government. So we exist to build the political commitment for a compact, connected, clean and resilient model of urban development. So with that in mind, I just wanted to start by recognizing that you know, the point that Diana made, which is, you know, cities are right at the epicenter of the COVID-19 crisis right now. And we see many cities around the world, and I'm sure we'll hear from our mayoral colleagues in a moment about the significant impact that COVID-19 has had on cities in terms of dwindling tax revenues, deepening inequality, record levels of unemployment in certain cities around the world, rising health costs and increased pressure on stretched public services. So cities are at the epicenter of the COVID-19 crisis. In our view, therefore, cities must be at the core of the solution to COVID-19, the economic and health crises. In our view, investing in cities as part of recovery packages can really help national governments create much needed economic security and jobs today, and at the same time enable rapid strides towards a low carbon, resilient and inclusive future tomorrow. And in our view, national government leadership and investment is urgently needed to complement that by subnational governments and mayors. And I'll say something more about that in a moment. But I would just mention that with the World Bank Group's core clients primarily being at the sovereign level, in our view, working to encourage national governments to go faster and further is extremely important. And the role of the World Bank Group in this transformation is ever more pressing and urgent than ever before. So our view is that national governments have a unique and critical role to play in driving a green urban recovery from this awful pandemic. This just shows some data that we collected, which looked at who needs to do what to drive a zero carbon urban transformation globally across all of the key geographies and all of the key sectors: transport, buildings, material efficiency and waste management. And you'll see on the right-hand side that if we exclude energy decarbonisation, local leaders have an enormously important role to play. Around a third of the primary powers and responsibilities sit at the local level to drive the type of transformation that we need. Around another third, though, sits with national or higher tiers of government. And finally, a final third requires deep collaboration between multiple levels of government. If we include decarbonisation of the electricity grid, the role of national and higher tiers of government becomes enormously more important in driving the type of urban transformation that we need to see. So really, local governments cannot drive a green recovery alone. They need national government support. Finances are under strain. Many smaller and tertiary cities have strong reliance on national transfers. And of course, many policies enabling investments in cities are set at the national level. We've put together a recent paper looking at the economic case for a green recovery through cities, and we identify 7 key priorities for national governments to invest in cities to drive a green recovery to meet their core economic and social objectives. I'm not going to go through all the sectors now, but Diana mentioned 2 that are particularly important: green construction and retrofits, and active transport and other non-motorized means of transportation. And the work that we've shown that not only does that significantly make a dent into the climate crisis that we face, but it also generates enormous economic and social benefits. And Sameh mentioned the co-benefits question and the importance of that. And the good news is that green investments in cities create enormous numbers of economic and social benefits in terms of jobs, wider social and environmental health co-benefits, as well as, of course, the impact in reducing emissions and boosting resilience. This just shows you some data on the large numbers of jobs that can be created in the near term through a green urban recovery. This just gives you a sense across the 7 sectors that I mentioned, per $1 million in spending, the type of job multipliers that we see in terms of green investments vis-a-vis their brown or grey equivalents. And I think you can see from this slide that it's a good news story, and that national governments really can invest in this type of urban infrastructure in the knowledge that it will create the types of new jobs that are needed in the short, medium, and long term. Now, we know the health crisis will fade, and I think we can be confident in that as a global community. But unfortunately, the climate we know will never come back. In our view, the good news is that investments in cities offer some of the highest potential to unleash economic activity and reduce emissions. So the graph here just shows you what we think it shows you based on available technologies and practices that it is possible to get to close to net zero in all the world's cities by mid-century, with major investments in the built environment, in transport, in waste and material efficiency. And that's what that wedge graph shows. And so it is possible to get there based on currently available technologies and practices. The even better news is that, yes, it will require new investment of round about 2% of global GDP year on year for the next 3 decades. And Diana mentioned that type of magnitude that will be required. But our analysis demonstrates that it would yield enormous economic and social dividends. In net present value terms, this type of investment would generate a net present value. In simple terms, that's benefits outweighing costs based just on direct economic savings in the order of $24 trillion by mid-century, and would support an extraordinary number of new jobs, 87 million by 2030, 45 million in 2050. And these are new jobs vis-a-vis a brown or grey equivalent investment story. So that's the good news. The bad news is that only a fraction of current stimulus measures have been directed towards green city measures. This is new data from Vivid Economics, which suggests that only 14% of total stimulus in the G20 and 10 other major economies have gone to sectors relevant to cities, and only 27% of that stimulus was green. So I think we need to go faster and further, and I think the World Bank's leadership in encouraging national governments to do that is really important. In our view, national governments are facing a triple challenge right now: ensuring successful recovery from the devastation of COVID-19, pushing forward on their long-term vision for development, and addressing the enormous threats posed by climate change. And in our view, cities as engines, growth engines and population hubs are right at the center of this challenge. So what we're doing at the moment is we're putting together a major report for the UK COP26 presidency, which will lay out how national governments can recover from COVID-19, tackle the climate crisis, and secure shared prosperity through cities. That report will focus on exploring the urban opportunity in 6 major emerging economies: China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, and South Africa. These are all important client countries of the World Bank Group. And the report will demonstrate that a low carbon urban transformation is within reach and will generate significant and multiple benefits, that building resilience to climate change is as urgent as decarbonisation. I think Diana made this point very well, and that there are multiple ways to foster a low carbon, resilient and inclusive urban transformation. And the report will lay that out in some detail for the countries that I mentioned. Seizing the Urban Opportunity will hold a high-level global event on this on the 17th of March, and I would extend an invitation to all of you on this call to join us at that. We'd very much welcome you joining and sharing your experience. I will leave it there, Peter. Thank you very much. And I would just end by saying Again, enormously welcome World Bank leadership in this space. I think the points that Diana mentioned are very, very important, and I'm very glad to see the IPCC giving attention to this agenda. And I think if we all work together with national and local leaders, we can really use this moment to build back better in all of the world cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, and not just for the global overview, but for also bringing to our attention the issue of jobs, and that a lot of this can actually be done within the current context of technology and approaches, and that we don't necessarily need a lot of new stuff. So with that, the next question is then, what can cities do? And we know cities have been hard hit by the COVID crisis, and they're at the forefront of the recovery. So our first city level speaker would be Mayor Jan Vapavuri. And Mayor Vapavuri was also Minister of Economic Affairs before, so he has both a national and a city level perspective. And Nick and Dan both referenced the 2050 goals set by Paris. However, we know that Helsinki has set an even more ambitious goal of carbon neutral by 2035. So that's quite impressive. And we look forward to hearing from Mayor Vapavuri on the approach on not just meeting the climate goal, but also the building back greener. So over to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sami. Good morning, Washington. Good evening, or good afternoon, as it is in Helsinki at this moment. Let me start by thanking World Bank and especially Sami for a very, very good cooperation we have had recently. We are really looking forward to continue on that path. As you certainly know, Helsinki is among those cities where we have taken the climate crisis seriously already for a quite long time. And the track record so far is also quite impressive. We have been able to decrease the amount of emissions in Helsinki by 26% since 1990. And if you calculate it per capita, it's actually even more impressive when the figure is as high as 44%. And here you actually see one of our challenges, that even if we have been able to make quite a lot of measures in order to decrease the amount of emissions in the city, the challenge has become bigger and bigger all the time because the city is growing all the time. And that is, of course, the case in most cities all around the world. However, some 3-4 years ago, when I actually took office as a mayor, we actually realized that we have been able maybe to pick up the low-hanging fruits, and that we need a more systematic approach to the emission policy in Helsinki. We started by put up the goal to become carbon neutral by 2035, and then we drafted a very concrete action plan in order to make that happen. And of course, the starting point, which is, I think, quite evident, but I think still worth mentioning, is that you should always start by knowing your enemy, understanding where your emissions come from. And what we did was to make a really careful study on where the emissions actually come from in Helsinki. And then after that, to take a very pragmatic approach. I mean, without going to details, in Helsinki, a capital of one of the most northern countries in the world, 56% of all emissions they relate and are linked to heating the city. So if 56% is the amount of heating as a part of the problem, it should also be 56% of the solution. And when traffic stands for 20% of the problem, it should also stand for 20% for the solution. So what we did was that we made a concrete action plan consisting of 147 action points, where, I mean, of course, most of those were related to heating, to energy efficiency, to buildings, and then the second biggest part to traffic, then to waste management and food and so on. Actually covering all the emissions we have in the city, and actually giving a path, what should we do in order to make the city carbon neutral by 2035. So you could say that the Carbon Neutral Helsinki 2035 plan was created to offer a holistic and wide-based practical view into how Helsinki can make its target a reality. It's a combination of large overarching steps to critical but small steps, like not forgetting anything. The action plan has been prepared in collaboration with hundreds of experts, presidents, and corporate representatives. So everyone has been allowed to follow and take part in the creation of the program on a website we have and at several workshops. And the same principle of openness will continue in the implementation phase, which we think is crucial. So the practical implementation of the procedures may vary as conditions change, knowledge increases, and technology develops. So we have a plan how to do it, but we understand that in 2 or 5 or 7 years' time, we may have better solutions to some part of the problem. But if we do not get them, then we follow the path we chose some years ago. Then we got the COVID crisis. When people ask me how the COVID pandemic has changed our attitude to the climate crisis and to our carbon neutral Helsinki plan, an easy answer would be that it hasn't changed it at all. It has actually not changed it at all. But if you take a little bit closer look on what actually has happened, I think that COVID pandemic has helped us to understand the importance of a sustainable, resilient city. And it may happen in my city and in maybe in some other cities which are similar enough to our city, that issues like climate crisis is taken even more seriously after the COVID than it was before it. I do strongly actually believe that COVID crisis revealed more than it changed. It made us understand what are actually the strengths and the weaknesses of different kind of societies, cities included. And we now have a better understanding of the attributes of a successful city and also the attributes of a not that successful city, and have a better understanding what we should do in order to build back better. I think one of the biggest lessons learned by the COVID crisis was that sustainable, resilient cities were able to handle and manage the crisis better than those less sustainable, less resilient. And it's actually worth putting even more emphasis on sustainability issues than before. In today's world where different kind of stimulus packages are discussed all around the world, I think it's really, really crucial. And here I echo what we have already heard today, that all the stimulus needs to strengthen somehow the sustainability and resilience of the city in order to be accepted. I was also asked to come with some remarks of what World Bank could do to help local and regional governments, and on a very broad terms, I would just shortly say that I think that World Bank could have a role in creating a structure. So you could say that scalable solutions are good, but they need to be part of a more holistic plan in order to work. And organizations like World Bank can create models and base frameworks that help local and regional governments identify key questions, understand what problems they should prioritize, create a holistic view of solutions. And I also think that World Bank could have a role in providing a method. So just to give an example, the World Bank could take the method used in creating the carbon neutral Helsinki plan and scale it to suit the needs and resources of developing countries. I know that circumstances are different and they differ from city to city and from country to country, and of course from more developed to less developed countries. But still the methods how we put up the carbon neutral plan of our city and how we are implementing it could be something which, with the expertise of World Bank, could be scaled to the use of also other cities in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Vapavuri, and it's interesting to see the data-driven approach to developing the action plan. So thank you for sharing your experience with us. So next, let's move to a very different kind of city, Kigali, Rwanda, which I'm from South Africa, and there's a joke that Kigali is the Singapore of Africa, right? Very clean, very green. So welcome, Mayor Prudence Rubingisa. Will talk to us about Kigali's commitment to a low carbon green city and the initiatives that they are developing, and both in response to the COVID and how they're thinking about the development of the city going forward. So over to you, Mayor Rubingisa.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm very delighted and very honored also to be part of this discussion leading to a greener city. In Rwanda, of course, the city of the Kigali city as a capital city, like any other cities across the world, we are currently being confronted with issues related to the compounding impacts of the pandemic, but also coupled with the climate change. Although this is actually a very big challenge, we are seeing again it as an opportunity for us to rethink and also to really bring ideas, innovative ideas, to revisit also our city resilience action plan, so that we can be able to mitigate climate changes that are currently being coupled with the pandemic we are facing with. So again, the pandemic has also pushed us to be responsive enough with innovative solutions, so as to have our city more resilient, more livable, and greener. We have prepared some slides that I want again to use by sharing some of the experiences that we have in the Kigali city. We've chosen really three main projects that we are leading currently to make sure that we are mitigating the climate change as a resilient city, but also bringing on board some green growth solutions as we keep fighting the pandemic. And our choice, of course, is being again, inspired by the high leadership that I want to quote here what our president said a while back in Davos when he was attending the World Economic Forum, that we are not making a choice between environment and prosperity, but we are rather looking at how we combine both. This is what is driving our choice, having chosen the three big projects that I'm going to share some of the experiences here. Number one is the Green City that has been selected in one of the areas that we are having in Kigali. It's called Kinyinya. Next slide, please. It's a city that one of the areas that have been selected to accommodate a green environment, but with a very collaboration with different stakeholders that are very active in the area of green environment. You can see the current status here. It shows a wetland that has to be rehabilitated. It shows a slum and a formal settlement that has been upgraded. We expect this project to cover 600 hectares that will be having a mixed-use, high-end infrastructure. Those are coupled with affordable housing. We want to bring on board what we see being a coalition or being inclusion of those having affordable housing versus a high-end apartments, but again also upgrading an informal settlement that is surrounding the area. Well, currently we are finishing the designs in a cooperation with different stakeholders. And it's a 3-year project that is going to be really big in the region, but also a case study that can show really that combining urban development with a greener city can also be possible. Next. This is how we expect the very final product to look at, migrating from what we are facing currently, as I said, slums stroke informal settlements being developed to a greener environment that is livable with a clean mobility. I'm going to talk about this again a bit later. We have different visions in these, projects with the 3 main priorities. It's a combination of affordable housing, as I said, that brings in an inclusion element without necessarily relocating people from where they live. We want an inclusion. They be, there with different other developments. But again, the most important point here is again to having it as a green urban development that has a certain percentage of the land used for green developments, with also the urban agriculture considerations that is being again considered here. Another element that is a priority is also the climate mitigation. We've been facing currently heavy rains that have been affecting the entire region for the last 2 years. And our aim is also to consider that the climate mitigation elements are here very well considered as a technology to put up those infrastructure to develop this area. And the project is expected to complete by 2025. And we are seeing already that it has been designed in a way that all the 3 key priorities are combined. We expect to see it happening. Another project that we have is I want to these are the visions that we have. Again, I've really highlighted this. It's a pro-people. It's a model that is community-based, that is more, as I said, linking affordable housing, climate change, together with the standards that have been put in the building code, showing both the infrastructure that is being put in place versus a sustainable urban development policy highlighted by the Ministry of Infrastructure in Rwanda, that it shows how we are going to be implementing progressively the project to a paradigm shift. Why I'm saying so is that it's a pro-people. We want the people already to be involved, giving away their land, expecting again to get a sustainable urbanization in the same area without necessarily taking them away from that specific area. We are also creating the green spaces around that big development. We see it as a transformation to the not only to the economy of the country that is being currently affected by the pandemic because of the way we see this big project implemented, creating jobs, but again, transformation in terms of livable city, where we are taking people from the slums, where we are upgrading their living conditions. Another project, I want to concur with what Diana said. And again, it has been clearly mentioned by, I think, Geoffrey. It's having a non-motorized mobility system. And here we are referring to electrical bike project that we have currently that is responding to a green transformation journey that we have undertook in the city. We have already mapped, different zones with emphasis being put in the CBD. Of course, the aim is to expand the project in the near future. This is again a response to the current pandemic we are facing. The city of Kigali is also facing one of the challenges as a way of defeating the pandemic in terms of transportation. Public transportation being a problem when people have to move for essential services, where now we are bringing on board a solution that is alternative, which is environmental friendly, that people can also use these electrical bikes and turning around, which is a clean mobility and is going to be one of the solutions we have already initiated as a piloting in the CBD, and our aim is to expand across the city. We have put in place also some mechanisms that are infrastructure-based, creating the walkways, pedestrian walkways on the main corridors, on the main roads, by also having dedicated lanes for bikes, so that a green combination of the existing infrastructure is really responding to what is expected as far as transport is concerned, but also as we need to reduce at the maximum level the contacts and the distancing that is expected, recommended by the medical team to defeat the pandemic. Our aim, as I said, is also to expand. Our last project, the project that I want to refer, that is a very important project here, is a green development, again, that we want to transform some of the slums or informal settlements that, again, it's a problem when it comes to defeating the pandemic. When you look at those informal settlements, the way people are living there with measures to observe the distancing, the confinement, the physical distance, the hygiene, minimum hygiene is difficult, as you can see, but the transformation we're bringing on board with a project that is going to drastically change the life in these, slums, is to do what I can call a land pooling approach, so that we put them in the decent housing with which are green, because we are using the local materials in terms of bricks and roofing, so that I want to get to the next slide. You see the pictures of what is being talked here. We want this transformation from this informal settlement to the next one that has a green area in the decent environment. We have started with a piloting covering almost 1 hectare, but our aim is again to expand in the entire city. What we mean here is, again, the element of inclusion, because most of these informal settlements, you can see the greening part of it is not really very impressive. People cannot really enjoy their lives. I don't mention again the issues related to minimum hygiene and also the drainage system. Everything that I highlighted being in a building code, respecting the environmental conditions, are going to be seen in the new phase. So far, we have initiated this project, and it's going to cover the entire district. Next. So what we are doing is migrating from the substandard, unsafe, and the high-risk zones to a new, affordable housing system that is environmental friendly, that is green. I want to take you to the next slide that shows more the comparison where we are coming from and where we are living, we are migrating to. The green dots on the red picture shows what we have currently as a green, slum, and what we expect on the right side after having, created that, decent environment with the green spaces being created. The challenge we are facing is having 1,000 people living on slightly 1 hectare, and we want to do a land pooling. We create a decent housing system with the green, of course, expecting also to having some basic infrastructure like medical, commercial buildings that provide essential services. Next. Now, what is it that we are going to do in terms of strategies to make this happen? As I said, we have already initiated the piloting. It is a very expensive project, you understand, but we are very ambitious, but we believe that this is going to happen. The piloting has started, migrating from this informal settlement to a green environment, more livable and more green. We are pulling land and we are creating land bank that can be attracting other investors now who can also put some basic infrastructure. And also we are seeing it as an evolving project. The budget that we've put in place can again evolve and invest in other similar projects because our aim is to expand the same across the entire city. Next. Now, this is how it is going to look like. As I said, we are having a decent living environment, dignified, affordable housing by an approach of land pooling. And on the upper floor, will be upper side of the land, we'll be having essential services of, hospitals, schools, and some commercial buildings to make sure that we really reach also the objective of minimizing the movement of people, or if anything, we want people to be, having also the putting in place that policy of non-motorized mobility that we expect from people living in this area. So as I said, this has started. We expect to expand it across the city. And we have so far mobilized resources from the government budget, but we are now attracting also some other stakeholders to chip in and start the journey together, and so that we can expand.
We have about 1 minute left for your.
Yes, I'm concluding. Please, next. Yeah, the next steps we want to bring on board again the entire national government. I think Geoffrey also mentioned this. The government is putting a lot of incentives so that this is a national concern, and the policies have been put in place. They are putting incentives in terms of subsidizing investment in this journey, but also making sure that we are really accompanied as a local government, making sure that the city is livable, making sure that the city is providing decent and affordable housing, but also making sure that the inclusiveness of our policies as far as the green city is concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Rubingisa, for that great overview of what the city of Kigali is doing. So with that, let's move to our next speaker, Mr. David Groisman, who's Director General of Urban Cooperation and Resilience in the city of Buenos Aires in Argentina. Will give us a quick overview of what the city of Buenos Aires is doing with regard to being carbon neutral by 2050, and also as it responds to the COVID crisis. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Well, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. First, I would like to thank World Bank for the invitation. It is truly an honor to participate and to share Buenos Aires' experience in today's session alongside such distinguished speakers. Well, Buenos Aires is the capital city of Argentina with 3 million inhabitants and a metropolitan region of another 14 million. Every day before the pandemic situation, 3 million people commute to work and study in the city. Buenos Aires is in the top of 20 larger metropolitan regions in the world. Next, please. In 2018, after a 2-year diagnosis and participatory process, where over 500 neighbors participating in several workshops, we launched Buenos Aires Resilience Strategy. Our strategy was made up of 5 pillars, which accounted for the main challenges and opportunities we had previously identified for the city: the future of work, gender equality, urban integration, environmental sustainability, and risk manager. Next, please. All around the world, cities are on the front line of the greatest global challenges, either regarding climate change or the COVID-19 response, among others. Cities are leading actors in approaching these challenges from a local perspective with innovative approaches based on evidence and citizen participation. Summits like Urban 20 or city-led networks are more relevant and impactful than ever, especially when taking into consideration urgent matters like climate change that require immediate and coordinated action. The proximity to citizenship and their ability for rapid and sustainable territorial transformation put cities and their multilateral mechanisms at the highest decision-making level of the international arena. Thus, since the resilience strategy was published, we focused on setting the climate change agenda a top government priority. As you probably know, over the last 4 decades, the number of extreme weather events has quadrupled. And in addition, the last decade has been the hottest on record. According to the United Nations, cities account for over 70% of global carbon emissions. This is why, in order to stop climate change, urban resilience action is imperative. Next, please. With regard to the distribution of greenhouse gas emissions in Buenos Aires, there are 3 main sectors that should be addressed: energy, transport, and waste management. Energy is the sector that accounts for more than half of the city's emissions, and most of them belong to residential and commercial buildings. When it comes to the effects of climate change in the city of Buenos Aires, our historical records show a consistent rise in the average temperature, as well as an increase in the amount of annual rainfall. These changes are already translating into extreme weather events, such as more intense storms, where a huge amount of rainfall in a relatively short period of time. Another impact is the more frequent heat waves, which represent a threat to the health of elderly and other vulnerable groups. Next, please. To tackle these challenges, last year we finished the elaboration of our new climate action plan, which will be soon published. The new plan is a roadmap to accomplish our commitment of becoming a net zero carbon city by 2050, but also a more prepared and resilient city, a city on a human scale, as well as an inclusive city with opportunities for all, for instance, by creating green shows. Next, please. Our climate action plan will continue the sustainable transition we have already started. Over the last years, the city of Buenos Aires created a new sustainable mobility options, such as the Metrobus and the Ecobici public bikes systems. In addition, we were the first city in Latin America with 100% LED street lighting. These initiatives encourage us to look forward to more ambitious goals. Next. Like many other cities in the world, COVID-19 was a shock to Buenos Aires, different from any other threat that we have been preparing for. Despite this unexpected black swan, the pandemic presented an opportunity to accelerate some of the transformations that the government had worked on in previous years in order to create a more sustainable city. The expansion of bike lanes and pedestrian streets proved to be a very useful solution, not only for promoting social distancing in public spaces, but also to encourage a cultural change towards sustainable mobility. For instance, when schools reopened last week in Buenos Aires, we were expecting a rise in the use of private cars and traditional public transportation. However, the highest increase was in bike commutes by 21%. In addition, COVID-19 brought a renewed value to local businesses and public spaces. Consequently, a city on a human scale, or a 15-minute city, is emerging from the crisis. Next, please. Like many other cities, Buenos Aires is committed to building back better and avoiding returning to the business as usual path. This is the reason why our new climate action plan will contribute with innovative and long-term solutions such as decarbonizing public buildings, implementing nature-based solutions. For example, we will transform 2 former railway areas into parks, and working on our community resilience, particularly among the most vulnerable groups. Next, please. Following its long-standing tradition of citizen participation, public access to information, and the design of evidence-based public policies, we launched the Buenos Aires Climate Change Platform, a fundamental element of our climate action plan. The platform is an open government initiative that seeks to inform and engage citizens in order to contribute to the city's climate goals. To conclude, there is a long way to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and we are convinced that the governments alone cannot do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David, for sharing the Buenos Aires experience with us. So let's move to our next speaker, Mr. Emrah Beydemir, who will talk to us about İlbank Turkey. So over to you, Emrah.
Honorable Chair, distinguished participants, esteemed guests, I'm solemnly honored to have the opportunity to address you on this spectacular organization that brought us together, at least virtually. Unfortunately, we are living in a world of crises that shape our lives. However, we are resilient and we shall overcome. Today, we are here to discuss a very significant topic and we'll explore possible solutions to many problems we commonly face. COVID-19 has largely been an urban crisis. As Nick Godfrey also mentioned, population density does not necessarily correlate with high incidence of the pandemic, but poverty and deprivation, poor planning, insufficient infrastructure, and weak governance structures do. Dense, uneven cities with poor infrastructure and services have the higher risk. Cities will still be key players in the pursuit of a green, resilient, and inclusive economic recovery. Recovery measures should steer cities' local economic development towards a lower carbon and more resilient pathway. Although we are struggling with the urgent and deep impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, it is not the only global threat over sustainable and resilient urbanization. We also have ongoing problems associated with the climate change, which amplify the impacts of pandemics. However, these are not separate risks and threats. Rather than being the three threats and that just happen to collide, pandemics and climate change are, in effect, co-travelers. In order to successfully fight against pandemic, the spreading speed of the global coalition over SDGs and green infrastructure should be as rapid as spreading speed of the virus. Similarly, how we need a full-scale fight against pandemic for global recovery, similarly, we need the same common perspective to cope with impacts of the climate change. Diane referred to the significance of infrastructure investments. In Turkey, rapid urbanization generating high municipal infrastructure investment costs, and Turkey was spending about 2% of its GNP on an annual basis for capital investments at the local level. Although we have provided basic water and sanitation services to all citizens, there is still a big investment gap to reach sustainable cities in Turkey. In addition to global agenda, Turkey also has two other major risks over sustainable development of cities as well. The recent one is the influx of migrants from other countries. On the one hand, Turkey is the country that hosts the largest number of refugees in the world, with 4 million refugees as of 2020. Turkey is prone to different types of disaster risks apart from the climate change impacts on the other. Among the disaster hazards, earthquakes pose a major risk to lives, livelihoods, and assets. So the resilient agenda is not an option for Turkey anymore. It should be the main guidance of policy implications for following years. I will share three major transformations that we have accomplished in the last couple of years in our institution to reach this specific goal. First, recently İlbank has been incorporating sustainability perspective in its daily routines and tries to monitor its direct contributions to SDGs. Our project portfolio serves as a leveraging effect on ensuring sustainable urban development goals, including water management, sanitation, urban mobility, energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate actions, and social development. However, there is still an urgent need to scale up development finance for the realization of the SDGs. We provide both financial and technical assistance to municipalities in achieving implementation and supervision of complex long-term development projects, particularly in infrastructure, which are vital for the achievement of most SDGs. The Sustainable Cities project includes planning tools that covers urban sustainability framework and index, integrated urban water management plans, capital investment plans, sustainable urban mobility plans, as well as sustainable energy and climate action plans. As being a bank of municipalities and local authorities, we are localizing SDGs and incorporating sustainability concept into the municipal investment through these efforts. Next, please. Secondly, we more focus on multi-sectoral and integrated projects. During post-COVID period, we balanced our project portfolio with cross-cutting priorities, including non-revenue water, drought, energy efficiency, climate resilience, and urban mobility. And we will ensure complementarity among projects in different sectors. As part of the Sustainable Cities project with World Bank and European Union, sustainable energy and climate action plans will be completed for metropolitan cities as repercussion effects of energy projects on climate change. Moreover, we have completed a grant project with World Bank named Support to ILBank on climate and disaster risk management capacity building. Also, all potential environmental and social impacts, such as pollution, deforestation, land acquisition, and resettlement, of our implementations are thoroughly assessed and ensure necessary mitigation measures are in place prior to initiation of project activities. We are of the opinion that ILBank is a key actor in Turkey to promote environmental and social sustainability in municipality projects, which we expect to accomplish by applying a comprehensive set of environmental and social standards defined by World Bank Group. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank to our World Bank colleagues for their continuous support in our journey to internalize sustainability perspective and to adopt more resilient infrastructure in Turkish cities. We have transferred international good practice and improved capacity through our cooperation with World Bank, including sustainable planning practice, resilient infrastructure, and effective water management. We transfer all these experience not only to a national agenda and implementations, as well as we disseminate these capacities directly to municipalities as being a development and investment bank of local authorities. Next slide, please.
1 minute, please, Emrah.
Okay. Third, ILBank used blending options for the improvement of sustainability level of Turkish cities through an innovative and effective financing mechanism. This financing option enables to incorporate international best practice, especially European Union perspective, into Turkish municipal investment procedures and leverage the impact of grant programs through supplementary credit tools. On the other hand, we will provide technical assistance to relevant Turkish authorities for the design and implementation of blending finance based on its experience with SCP. Next slide. Turkey is placed as the largest refugee hosting country in the world for the last 7 years. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a huge investment gap for some of the major Turkish cities by hosting millions of Syrians under temporary protection. We developed a project portfolio over 1 billion euro in order to address municipal service priorities, particularly construction and rehabilitation of water supply, wastewater and solid waste facilities in provinces affected by the Syrian refugees in Turkey. Next slide, please. We are improving institutional capacity of both our team and municipalities to build more resilient environment in the long run by support of Sustainable Cities project. In this respect, we have focused on supporting planning activities, ensuring easy access to sustainable finance, and as well as monitoring the process of our project implementation and evaluating impacts on SDGs. I want to express one issue about Paris Agreement. Although Turkey has not ratified the agreement yet, Turkey performs much better than many countries that have ratified in terms of mitigation and INDCs. As I have tried to underline, we are facing common problems that require collective efforts to overcome. Many of the crises we have been facing now do not have any boundaries. We, as ILBank, have been oriented around the idea to work closely with all the stakeholders. The World Bank is not simply a partner for us. We consider the bank as the North Star of the IFIs. We believe together we can accomplish what is required from us as the facilitators of grant projects. As a take-home message, I would like to express once again that we cannot afford to lose the fight, considering the gravity of consequences. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Emrah. Thank you very much. So let me turn now to hear from our senior management. We have Ana Bierde, who's the Regional Vice President for a very dynamic and diverse region, Europe and Central Asia. So Ana, please, let's hear from you on senior management's view on sort of how we're dealing with the issue of cities and climate and moving to this green approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you so much for having me join the event this morning. I have to say, listening to all the speakers, it's been absolutely fascinating. And in the Europe and Central Asia region, we have started this journey on really trying to see how we can make sure that as our clients start thinking through the recovery, we do it through the lens of being able to advance on the green transition process that many of the countries have already started and to in fact accelerate it. And it's been great to hear the really strong case actually for a greening urban recovery and the strong linkages to stimulus and to job creation. So I'm really happy to have joined you this morning, and it's great to have heard from the other speakers. So what I would like to do is really just stress a few things. As many others have said, green growth, climate change, sustainable and inclusive development are in the central focus of global leaders when developing effective recovery strategies in response to the ongoing COVID crisis. I think it's a great opportunity for us to really step back and make sure that we take this opportunity. Jobs, sustainable growth, and poverty reduction can be stimulated by adapting to climate change, as we have seen, and investing in green infrastructure, transitioning away from fossil fuel subsidies, encouraging investment in environmentally sustainable technologies, and generating lower carbon output has to be an impetus for all of us. I think from a global perspective, the European Union has set the pace with a very ambitious European Green Deal that plans to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. In the World Bank's Europe and Central Asia region, we are, as I mentioned, adopting a green transition framework to ensure that our policy and financial support for the region's continued economic transition to a market economy will ensure sustainability, resilience, and inclusion. And we're committed to offer our comprehensive financial and cutting-edge knowledge services to meet our clients' short-term and long-term needs. I think we need to work on in a much smarter way to exploit what we call win-win space to advance the green recovery and transition agenda. And our transition focus essentially on 5 pillars. And I think they're very nicely aligned to many of the priorities that the speakers have already mentioned. The first of the pillars is decarbonization. We also are focusing on natural capital renewal. Natural disasters and climate resilience continues to be a big priority. Inclusive infrastructure service delivery, and here cities have a major role to play, of course, and then just transitions. What I'd love to do is just illustrate a few of these green transition challenges within the ECA context. So environmental degradation has significant economic, fiscal, and inclusion impact, and we know that poorer populations are both more exposed and more vulnerable to pollutants. Indeed, we have calculated that the economic and fiscal cost of environmental degradation in Kosovo and in Georgia are both over 7% of GDP annually. I'm sure you have also seen many reports around the significant air pollution challenges Poland faces, with cities choked with smog, especially during the winter months. There was reference to the importance of heating in Helsinki. And many countries in the ECA region have the same issue, where heating is a major source of pollution and needs to be part of the solution going forward. In Western Balkans, South Caucasus, and Central Asia, we record pollutant exposure at about 2.5 times the EU average, and Turkey has more than 3 times. So this is an important agenda. Europe and Central Asia is also the most water-stressed region outside of the Middle East and North Africa region, and Central Asian countries are among the most water-stressed in the world. Globally, we know it, and we heard it this morning, cities account for more than 70% of CO2 emissions, and therefore the transformation of cities and urban systems will be a key factor in achieving carbon neutrality in the future, and significant progress has been made in understanding the challenges. More efforts are needed, however, to support national and local governments in developing concrete and feasible solutions for cities to systematically reduce the emissions from their energy system, land use, buildings, transport and infrastructure services, as well as industries and businesses. And I think everyone this morning has laid out a really important case for the construction sector, as well as for the retrofitting process in terms of its potential to both generate greener solutions, but also to generate jobs, which is really the emphasis and focus of many leaders today. COVID has had a dramatic impact across Europe and Central Asia and focused attention on immediate health and safety net measures. Cities, as elsewhere in the world, have been on the front lines of the emergency response and now in the early recovery phases, implementing measures to protect the poor and vulnerable while jump-starting economies. The recovery efforts offers opportunities for cities not only to regain lost grounds, but also to accelerate the green transition. In each of the city presentations, I've noted really good lessons and examples that link directly to our own key focus areas and work around the green transition. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just mention a few. In terms of decarbonization, the first of our 5 pillars, I think Helsinki's 2035 decarbonization plan has parallels and surely lessons for a lot of our work going on. But I'd like to maybe just highlight the work we're just starting now with Bulgaria, one of the EU's most energy and carbon intensive economies, around 3 times the EU average. We will support the government to put in place subnational plans for an energy and climate transition process that leaves no one behind. In other words, what we call a just transition process. The Climate Action Plan for Buenos Aires shows a great commitment to achieving net zero emissions and a strong focus on climate mitigation measures. The city's adaptation challenges are similar to issues such as increased urban heat and greater intensity in rainfall events that many of our city clients face. In client countries such as Romania, Croatia, and Turkey, our teams are also providing support in the disaster and climate resilience space with a specific focus on seismic risk. Here, the retrofitting of old buildings, both for energy and seismic purposes, offers opportunities to reduce seismic risk and support the climate agenda simultaneously. The transition and green recovery must be underpinned by good governance and requires local governments with capacity. I think Kigali's cutting-edge response to its housing and urbanization challenges is an excellent example of this. It was also strongly illustrated in the presentation on the Sustainable Cities program in Turkey, one of my favorite programs actually that we are working together with the authorities on, where we're working with diverse municipalities in mainstreaming sustainability, as well as climate and disaster resilience in both city master planning and capital investment planning processes. So just as cities will be the leaders in helping their countries achieve sustainability and climate targets, the urban disaster risk management and land global practice, headed by Same through its work with client countries, will clearly be at the forefront of meeting the World Bank's climate change targets. I strongly believe that the bank has an important role to play in the cities and climate change arena and making advances on urban climate finance for both adaptation and mitigation. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation and will follow the recovery and greening process of the cities represented here today with great interest. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was great. And quite a few of the speakers had asked what the World Bank was doing, what's the role. So it's great to hear from one of our regional vice presidents that this is a top priority the city space. So with that, let me hand it over to Same to give us some closing remarks as a global director. Please, Same, over to you. You are muted, Same. No, we cannot hear you. So Same will try and get his speak on, but let me thank everyone for participating in the session. It's been very rich, and I think we heard very diverse approaches from the different cities and also from our senior management. And so with that, let me thank everyone. This has been a fascinating discussion and hopefully just the start of a discussion and something that we will continue working on through our cities and climate engagements within the World Bank as well. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you soon in the next session. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to all the speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a really inspiring conversation. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I lost audio for a second. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Sami.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Peter. So we'll just have a moment of break, and I guess we can start the next session promptly at 8:30. We'd like to keep on schedule because afterwards there's going to be a bit of a award ceremony. And we'll just be back with you in a couple minutes. Thank you.